Karina read, we are in Psalm 125, and it's this call to, and two things. One thing, as I was studying this, we saw this in Proverbs, because what we get is a little bit of a picture of discipleship. This is what it looks like to follow Jesus. Here are some things to do that God calls us to be about. But one thing that we saw in Proverbs, and we're kind of seeing in the Psalms as well, is when I sometimes think of discipleship, I think about things that I need to do, correct? Like, hey, you need to read your Bible, you need to go to church, you need to do this. But what we see biblically in discipleship, are there things that we do? Like, sure, but discipleship and following Jesus is, I said, it's less about doing and more about being, right? We're humans, not human doings, is the old saying. And so a disciple of Jesus has a lot to do with how we do things, how we are less about doing and more about being. And so that's why even today in this passage, this call for endurance, of lasting. Overall big picture in the Psalms of Ascent, they're kind of written in sections of 3. And this is the third section of this set of 3. And you see this pattern through the Psalms of Ascent, and it usually starts out with some sort of situation of distress or stress. Okay, so there's trouble, and then there is a reminder in the next psalm about the Lord's power. So there's trouble, and then the answer is never us, the answer is always God. And then the third psalm is all about the celebration or the safety or the home that we have with God. So last time it was they went to the temple, and today we go to Zion. We're home, we're rescued, we're safe. So last week we talked about deliverance and rescue, and this week we're going to talk about the safety that we have in Mount Zion, safety we have in the presence of God. And so again, there's this call to endure until the end. If any of you have ever taken on an endeavor, maybe you have done a race or started a new project, really finishing is what matters, right? Starting doesn't really matter. I'll get to that in a second. And the scriptures are pretty straightforward about this as well. It's about how you, not how you start. Jesus in Luke chapter 14 put it this way. He says, which of you, desiring to build a tower, he's talking about the cost of discipleship, of following Jesus. Which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Okay? Finishing. Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all will see it and will begin to mock him. So Jesus said, hey, if you want to follow me, think about the cost. Think about what it will take to finish, to endure till the end. The Apostle Paul, at the end of his life in 2 Timothy, put it this way. He says, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Okay, so it wasn't necessarily how like Paul started pretty dramatically, right? He was riding on his horse to go persecute and kill Christians, and he gets knocked off his horse, literally, meets the risen Jesus, and becomes his follower. What's more remarkable about that, what needs to be celebrated, is how Paul finished the race. Through all the struggles, through all the things he went through, he says, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. And so the scriptures are really clear. Like, it's about finishing. It's about endurance. What I want to talk about today is, how do you endure? How do you get through? How do you go through the challenges of both following Jesus and of this world and cross the finish line? Many of us, and many people in general, view Christianity or getting to heaven as sort of a tightrope, right? Maybe you've heard the term like a backslider, like, hey, they're just going to slide away from God, and they're kind of always nervous. We talked about this a little bit at community group this week, like, hey, am I doing enough? Am I going to go to heaven? We ask the question, how good is good enough? And we kind of think Christianity is this tightrope, and we better be real careful, otherwise we're going to what? Like, fall off the rope. Right? And so that's the picture some of us have of what it looks like to follow Jesus. Like, I better keep my stuff together so I don't fall off the edge. There's sort of a fear. But that's not the picture we get in Psalm 125. The picture we get in Psalm 125 is somebody sit in the middle of mountains where they're protected, that they're stable, that they're secure, that they're safe. There wasn't a fear of falling away. There was an assurance that they would endure and they would be protected. I'm not sure, this guy's a Christian, but he's kind of a business, kind of motivational guy. Maybe we could term him as an influencer. He started kind of his thing. He's got a website. It started out as Stuff Christians Like, and he kind of poked fun at different Christian stuff, and his name's John Acuff, and he has written numerous books now. So I guess he's an author / influencer, okay? And he wrote a book called Start. And its encouragement in this book was to start something. If you want to live with the life of meaning, just start doing that. If you have a passion, like start pursuing that passion. And it was just called to start. And it had all these, hey, start out these goals, and whatever you need to do, you just need to start. And so he had this 30-day challenge that he would give people. And they would pick out a goal or whatever they wanted to start, and then they would see if they could accomplish it, and they'd take these steps, and they would kind of evaluate what they did. And he said what was interesting is then he would go do talks and stuff on it, and then he said people kept pulling him aside, and they go, John, they're kind of entrepreneur types, like, I got no problem starting stuff. I start stuff all the time. They go, I have a problem finishing things. Right? Can anybody else relate? Anybody else have a list at home? I was just talking to Phil before the service, like, hey, I had these things that I was hoping to finish, to accomplish this week, that things just kind of changed, and I just didn't get them done. All right, so a lot of us don't have a problem starting things. We have a problem finishing things. And so he kind of took that information, and then he went, and a guy came to him and said, he was a researcher, and he said, hey, do you mind if I study the people who are in your 30-day challenge and see, hey, what's the difference between the guys that, or the men and women, the people who finished the 30 days challenge and who didn't? And he said, yeah, let's do it. Let's see why they finished it. And what they found was kind of the opposite of what he had thought. They had thought that the sort of the most disciplined, the most regimented, the most hardworking, the most detailed would be the ones that finished. The ones that really put their nose to their hands to the plow and put their nose down and grit it, but they didn't find it. What he said is the most effective exercises were not those that pushed people to work harder. The ones that got people to the finish line did just the opposite. They took the pressure off. Anybody else feel that when you just kind of ease off the pressure of something, like maybe your perfectionism, your expectation of what it's going to do, it actually allows you to finish what you started. And this is what we see in Psalm 125. Those that endure, those that make it, that cross the finish line of the Christian faith, are the ones that believe the gospel, that have taken the pressure off. At the core, the message of Christianity and finishing the race is one of what God has done for us, not what we do for God. It's resting in his grace. And I've kind of started thinking about this, and one thing about me is I am drawn to sort of steady, joyful, older Christians. Whether it's seminary professors that I had or guys that taught at my school, Dr. Kistemacher, in his 80s, had this joy and affection for Jesus. Steve Brown is a guy that would teach at our seminary, and he was just older, and he had this joy about him, an easiness to him, a relaxation about him, and I'm always drawn to that. Some guys that were further away from like who I am, who I've been quoting this, like a guy like Eugene Peterson, who just had this sort of joy about him. I call it a relaxation, which we'll get to later. Or a guy like Dallas Willard. There's all these older Christians, pastors, theologians that I would just watch, and I was drawn to them. And as I looked, I was like, they all had one thing in common. Their understanding of Christianity was one of grace. when we were in a seminary class with Dr. Kistemacher, I would just go and I basically took classes so I could listen to him talk. So I was like, hey, I want to end up like him. And somebody asked me like, hey, how did you keep the faith? Because he was at the end of his life. He actually passed away about a year after this. And they go, hey, how do you do it? How do you stay into your 80s and have this affection and love for Jesus and love for his church and love for people and not growing bitter and kind of mad and angry? And he goes, because of the message of the Bible. And they go, oh, okay, like what's that? And he goes, Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. He went to the heart, to the core of Christianity. He went to a kid's song. This guy's wrote more books and commentaries than anybody that I've ever even talked to. And he went to the core of Christianity, and that's what allows you to endure. When your faith and your trust is in who God is and what he has accomplished for you, and not sort of what you do and what you accomplish for God, it brings us freedom, and it actually leads to endurance. I kind of have also been around, Corey and I were talking about this last night, like some real go-getters, right? They're just passionate, and they're fiery, and they're excited, and we're going to plant churches. Like that's where I can drift towards. And as I look, I'm like, more and more of those guys, they just sort of flame out, right? They disqualify themselves. They get too much up, like they don't last. And I don't want to be that. And you don't want to be that. I know you're not a pastor, but can you think of Christians who are the same way? That they're passionate, they're on fire, and then they just sort of what? Flame out. The way of endurance is a way of grace, a way of trusting in God. And so they gave us this Christian life as Jesus called it, as a building, as a fight, as a race. And so how do we endure to finish this race of following Jesus? And not just to get by, right? Following Jesus just to get by, does that sound very fun or purposeful or meaningful? But how do we endure not just to get by, but actually to thrive? And so today we see this in Psalm 125. We're going to look at the stability of our salvation, the foundation of it, the surroundings of our salvation, where he talks about the mountains, where there's God's protection. And then I stole this from Mike Edmondson, who is a pastor up in Nashville. He called it the swagger of our salvation. Don't you like that word? Swagger. If you're a follower of Christ, you should have a swagger, a humble confidence is what we talk about here at Crosspoint, that we're humble, but we're confident. We're not just kind of tossed to and fro. We're not nervous about falling off the tightrope. And that only comes from having a right understanding of who God is. And so Psalm 125 starts with this solidity or security of our salvation. And what we see is the Lord is a firm foundation. At the core, at the bottom, at the base, what we are standing on is God as our foundation. Jesus says, build your house upon the rock. He's the rock. When we build it on anything else, what does he say? It's sand. It's like we'll go to the beach this afternoon. There was like sand at one part of it this morning, and guess what? Tide just rips it away and moves it, right? And so if we build our faith and our trust on anything other than God, it's not firm. It's like sand. Verse 125, verse 1 says, those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion. So these guys and ladies and kids, they all would have been taking this pilgrimage to Jerusalem and this journey, and they would always see Mount Zion. It would always be in their view on this pilgrimage. So even the pilgrimage itself could have been dangerous. Like they're packing up all their stuff and walking to Jerusalem, right? And there's robbers and thieves and all this stuff. But they would continually be looking at Mount Zion. And he said, those who trust in the Lord are like that. And what you see in a mountain, Phil and I were talking about it this morning about North Carolina and Colorado. We've gone to some similar places. A mountain is firm and secure. Right? Every year, we go to North Carolina every year, but quite often we go to Grandfather Mountain up in North Carolina. Guess what? Grandfather Mountain's still there. We'll go next year. Guess what's going to be there? grandfather mountain. It's not going anywhere. It's firm. It's secure. And he's saying it's the same with our faith. If you're a follower of Christ, if your trust is in Jesus, your faith is firm and it's secure. Because it's not faith in yourself, it's because it's a what? Those who trust in the Lord. Our faith and trust is in God who is secure. It says that he endures forever. And so if our faith and our trust is in him, guess what? We're connected to him. And if he endures forever, guess what we do? Endure forever. Now, it sounds good, and it sounds good for the psalmist, but does that meet our everyday reality? Is your everyday reality of faith in God and trust in God firm and secure and never changing? It's like, no. Our faith is what? Hot and cold, up and down, strong and weak. That could be on a given day. It could be on a given week. It could be in years. Eugene Peterson put it this way. He says, all the persons of faith I know are sinners, doubters, and I like this, uneven performers. Can anybody else relate to that? If you look back over your life, I'm an uneven performer when it comes to trusting God. But he says the good news is this: we are secure not because we are sure of ourselves, but because we trust that God is sure of us. Again, it's trusting in God's security of us. The opening phrase of the psalm is those who trust in God. This is important. Look at this. Not trust in their performance, in their morals, in their righteousness, in their health, in their pastor, praise God, in their doctor, in their president, in their economy, or in their nation. Those who trust in God. That's firm. That's secure. All those other things, insecure, unfirm, continually changing. Those who decide that God is for us and will make us whole eternally. That's where security comes from. And faith is unstable when we trust in the wrong things, when we trust in ourselves, in our own performance, in our own morals, in our own righteousness. It's unstable when we put it in other things or other people or other institutions. Right? Their pastor, their doctor, their president, their economy, their nation. When we put our trust in those sorts of things, guess what? They're unstable. And we put those things in a place they never deserve to be in. Do we need them? Sure, yeah. You need a pastor. You need a doctor, right? We need a president. We need to have an economy. But don't trust in them. They're not ultimate. They're shaky at best. A simplified version of the same idea is, Tim Keller put it this way. He says, it's not the strength of your faith, but the object of your faith that actually saves you. Okay, so it's not that, hey, I feel real faithful today. I have a really strong faith. I got a real zeal and passion for the Lord. Are those things bad? Like, no, but just don't trust in them. You trust in the object of your faith. The strength is in the mountain, who is the Lord. And so we can't get those things out of order. Our trust needs to be in the object of our faith, and that's what actually saves us and ultimately keeps us. It's what allows us to have endurance. Endurance comes from trusting in the one who endures. I will endure forever. Look at how 1 Peter 2 describes it with the same language. 1 Peter 2, verses 4 to 6. It says, you come to him, a living stone rejected by men, but in the sight of God chosen and precious. That's Jesus. He says, you yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For it stands in scriptures, here it is, behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone chosen and precious, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. That's the hope of the Christian. That's what brings stability. That's what allows us to have a firm foundation. Our role, according to 1 Peter 2, is to what? come to him. That's what we do. We come to him. We fix our eyes on him. We see him as our foundation. He's the stability. He is the security. He's the one that is everlasting. And the result, we're chosen, we're precious, and we will not be put to shame. And this brings security eternally. Because again, our trust is in him. The second way that we see a security or what allows us to endure the Christian walk, the Christian life, in verses 2 to 3, just call it the surrounding of our salvation. The Lord protects us. Look at verses 2 to 3. It says, as the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people from this time forth and forevermore. For the scepter of wickedness shall not rest on the land allotted to the righteous, lest the righteous stretch out their hands to do wrong. What he's saying, just as, so they would be in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem would be surrounded by mountains. And just as those mountains surround Jerusalem, the Lord surrounds his people. In that time, and even in our day, mountains were a natural defense. You'd be protected by the mountains that were around you. It was a safe place to be. They provided security and protection. And so he says, hey, just as those mountains surround and protect, the Lord, your God, is going to surround and protect you. Josh Moody put it this way. He says, trust God because he protects like the mountains. He's solid, dependable, certain, and secure, just like the mountains which surround Jerusalem. So when we trust in God, he surrounds us, he protects us, he brings security, and that allows us to endure. Nothing gets to us that God doesn't allow. Mike Edmondson, in his sermon on this, he says, yeah, there's a dog, but the dog's always on the leash, okay? So it can only go so far. And that's how God is with us. He will protect us. Now, hopefully there's some questions in your mind kind of going through, like, hey, whoa. I've been through some pretty hard things in my life. Sometimes I don't feel like God protected me. Sometimes I don't understand. This was a struggle for me. And it's hard, but it's true throughout the scriptures. Even though there's challenges and difficulties in life, even those are just mere tools in the hands of the Lord. The challenges and difficulties of life are just mere tools in the hands of the Lord. You see it in the book of Job, right? The whole book of Job, the beginning is this kind of interaction with God and Satan, and God's like, okay, I'm gonna let you have your way with Job. I'll show you what his faith and trust is in. And if you read the book, you'll see that Job went through some stuff. He went through some hardships. He went through some difficulties. But in the end, he trusted in God, despite what was going on around him. You see the same thing in the life of Jesus, correct? Jesus came on this rescue mission, and guess what happened to him? Challenges, difficulties, a cross. Right? Joseph in the Old Testament book, he's like the whole point of the back half of Genesis. Joseph was the brother. Guess what his family did to him? First of all, they threw him in a ditch to die. And they're like, we can actually make some money off of him. So then they sold him to the Egyptians. They sold him into slavery. Then he becomes a slave. Then he gets accused of sleeping with the king's wife, right? So he gets thrown into jail, right? So Joseph went through some what? Challenges, some difficulties, some hard things. One verse that was really helpful for me, about a year after I became a Christian, I was like, why all the challenges? Why are the hard things? What about this, and that I did, and some self-inflicted things? I had a hard time wrapping my mind around, like, how could that happen and I still be a Christian? It was a legitimate question that I had. It should be a legitimate question that we all have. but I was listening through a sermon series from a different church through the book of Genesis, and the pastor read Genesis 50:20, and it was just eye-opening for me. It changed my perspective, everything that had ever happened. Genesis 50:20 says, "You intended to harm me. You intended difficult, hard circumstances to bring me harm." But it says, "But God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." The hard, difficult things that we all go through are just tools in the hand of the Lord. He says, "I'm going to protect you through them all. I'm going to be with you through them all." We'll sing a song after this on the Psalms of Ascent. He says, and it says, "I will lead you out the other side." That's what the Lord does. And when we can get this, when we can understand this, that God will trust us, that God will protect us, that we can trust Him, that we can trust that He works for our good, it allows us to endure anything. I just saw an article, I think it was a 50-year anniversary of, there's a prominent Christian author, writer, Joni Eareckson Tada, who became paralyzed diving into a lake 50 years ago. And her whole life has been this witness, this testimony of faithfulness and trust and love for God, despite what? Difficult circumstances. And when we can understand this, when we can grasp this, that allows us to endure anything. That God brings protection. He is surrounding us. Sure, there's dangerous dogs, but guess what? They're on a leash. He'll never leave us. He'll never forsake us. It allows us to endure. Verses 4-5 show us this swagger, this humble confidence that we can have because of the security and protection we have from God. I call it a humble confidence. Verse 4 says, "Do good, O Lord, to those who are good, and to those who are upright in their hearts. But those who turn aside to their crooked ways, the Lord will lead away the evildoers. Peace be upon Israel." There is a warning here on those who walk away. The walking away you see in the Bible is a conscious choice to rebel against the Creator God. You don't just sort of slide away or slip away. You make a choice that says, "God, I want nothing to do with you." You reject Him. You turn from Him. And you walk away. But what this passage also shows us that there is a Lord who will do good for us. It says, "Do good, O Lord, to those who are good." Again, when we understand this, that the blessings, the good things that we experience, and the difficult, hard things that we experience, they're all for our good when we have a right view of God. Romans 8:28 and 29 says, "This is the good that God promised." Because some of us can read that and like, "Hey, do good to me, God," and it can get a little prosperity on us. Oh yeah, God's just going to bless me and I'm going to be healthy and wealthy and live a long life. That's not the good He is talking about. The good of the Scriptures is what Romans 8 talks about. He says, "And we know that for those who love God," what does it say? "All things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purposes." So the good is God is doing all things for our good. And He says, "For those whom He foreknow, He also predestined," and this is the good, "to be conformed to the image of His Son." The good that He is doing is conforming us to the image of His Son. He's making us like Christ through good things, hard things, frustrating things, things that are making us be patient, things that we're mad about, things that we're angry about. He's doing all of these things for our good, and that good is to make us like Christ. Philippians 1:6 put it this way. He says, "He who began," what? "A good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Christ Jesus." That God has begun a good work in you, and He's going to bring it to completion. he will use all circumstances to make us more and more like his Son. And so our security comes from knowing that God will do us good, no matter the circumstances. Everything that he is doing is meant to conform us into the image of Jesus, to make us like Christ. And when we know that, what does it allow us to do? Endure. Get through. We can say, hey, I don't like this much. Job, he's like, hey, I don't like this much, but I trust God. He's doing something in it. Have we all been through hard things that we come out the other side of them and say, I might not have picked that right, but God worked in and through that. I'm more like Jesus because of that. And so we'll close with this. He closes with this prayer. He says, peace be upon Israel. What he's saying, Lord, do good to your people, do good to your church, and cause her to thrive. It's his work. And when we know it's his work, it allows us to relax. It allows us to rest. It allows us to have a humility about us because we know it's the Lord's work, but it also gives us a great confidence because we know that he will what? He'll complete it. He'll finish it. He'll use it all. And so, again, most of us think that this Christian life is like this tightrope. Or we go mountain biking sometimes in Jonathan Dickinson, and they have these boards that you mountain bike across. And whenever I get to the boards, I kind of tighten up, right? And then I fall off the edge of it because I'm too tight. To be successful in the boards, you actually have to relax. You actually have to loosen up. You actually have to have care. It's probably the kids are better at it than I am. They're carefree, and then what do? Man, right across the board. They're not thinking about falling off. That's what Christianity is. There's a relaxed confidence because it's God who we are trusting in. Peterson went on saying how much this is not like the tightrope. He says, Psalm 125 says, this is not the way it is at all. Being a Christian is like sitting in the middle of Jerusalem, fortified and secure. First, we are established, and then we're entrenched. We're settled and then sentineled. It means to be guarded. Made like a mount and then protected as if by the mountains. That's the view of the Christian life. That's what allows us to endure. And so the last sentence is peace over Israel. A colloquy. I listened to that Google a lot yesterday. It means another phrase for something. I didn't know how to say it. It means a phrase for, but in the context accurate, translation would be relax. Peace over Israel, the translation could be relax. We are secure. God is running the show. So, follower of Christ, that's the call today. That's how we endure. We relax. We trust that we are secure because God says we are. We trust that God is running the show, and we live in light of it. Each week, which we'll do now, we participate in communion. And it's a pointer to the ultimate reason that we can endure. We can endure because our hope and our trust is in Jesus. That, as Psalm 125 says, that without him we would go astray. But he came after us. He rescued us. He bore our rebellion. He bore our sin on the cross. His body was broken. His blood was shed to bring us in, to surround us, to protect us, to bring security. The cross shows that evil didn't get the last word. The Father knew the resurrection was coming. Jesus endured the suffering for our sake. He lost all security to what? Bring us security. He lost protection to bring us protection. That's what the cross reminds us of. And that's what communion does. It points us to that, his broken body and his shed blood on our behalf. And that sustains us. It shows us that we can endure. And it also points us to this day forward when the good work is complete. So there's going to be a time from now until Jesus returns that God is going to continually use all circumstances to conform us to his image, to make us like Jesus. And this meal is a pointer to the one day when we're fully formed, when we're the full image of God, and we're in his presence. And so we invite you to participate in communion. Here we have the little cups where you can peel off the top, take the bread, and then peel it off and drink the cup as a reminder that your safety and security is in the God who is for you and the God who loves you. Pray with me. God, we thank you for I thank you for the pattern of these Psalms. They're kind of like a repeat of life. There's distress, there's stress, there's challenges. But God, when we get into those circumstances, when we get into those situations, it's an opportunity for us to look to you, to be reminded of who you are, that you deliver us, that you rescue us. But God, you don't deliver us and rescue us. You bring us into your presence. You are with us. And it is the presence of you that allows us to endure. It's your presence that allows us to know that we have a firm foundation, that no matter what is going on around us, no matter all the shifts and changes in our lives, you are steady, you are sure. God, we thank you for the reality that you protect us, you watch over us, and God, ultimately, you are for our good. I pray as we think about these truths, we would apply them to our lives, we would apply them to our hearts, and they would be an avenue, a means to be able to worship you, to celebrate you, to live with a humble confidence because of who you are and what you promise. In Jesus' name, amen.